And actually, but I'll have an ask at the end, which is to get me in front of as many unfriendly people as possible. Because if you're in the 5th Congressional District for the last 20 years and you're just speaking to the choir, and you always speak just to the choir, we're only going to get to that 40% mark that we keep seeing since 2004. What we've got to do is get outside our comfort zones, and I think Karen's going to talk a bit about that. But just a bit of my history, if you don't know me, and for those of you that were at the meeting this morning, I apologize for repeating myself. My mom moved from Cut Bank, Montana to go to Gonzaga in 1967, and my dad moved from a small town in Oregon, state in Oregon, to go to Gonzaga. They got married on graduation day. Then they raised me. I lived in Spokane my entire life up until after I went to Gonzaga as well. I went to public schools. Okay. My mom was a public school teacher. Then she became a principal for the last 10 years of her career. So I have an education background in my family. She was a strong WEA, which is Washington Education Association union member. She had to move outside of the city of Spokane in order to get a principalship job, and we're pretty convinced it's because of how loud she was when she was a union member. Well, we've got our priorities as a country backwards when the government workers and the last of the middle class and the trades that are members of a union that are represented become the enemy. And that's what happens when you have income inequality and you have too many people at the bottom and then you've got the money stacked at the top. We start looking to those people that are actually making a decent living and blaming them for what they actually want, which is what we all want, economic security. We want to decrease income inequality. But Eastern Washington and the 5th District have seen a loss of manufacturing over the years and a loss of business, and we become high poverty. If you go down to Clarkson in southeastern Washington, the poverty rate is 24%. Spokane County is 17%, and the city of Spokane is even higher. We've become such an urban area that the problems come into the center of the city, and I hear about it every day as the council president. But I digress, and I'll go back to myself. I moved to, after I graduated from college, I lived in Oakland, California, and worked for the Oakland Raiders for 3 years. I then moved to Madison, Wisconsin, and then I got the chance in 2001 to move back where my parents were in Spokane. And I ran a business, 3-state region for a local ticketing industry business called Tickets West while I was there. So I ran the Montana, Idaho, and Washington region. While I was there for 7 years, I doubled the income from $13 million to $26 million. So I have a successful career in business and managing people and understanding how the business world works. But I went back to graduate school to get my degree, my master's degree, and while I was there I realized I didn't want to be making 20% profit for a company and shareholders while I couldn't even pay my employees a living wage. And that was a constant. They want you to make 20% profit, but then you're arguing for a living wage for your employees. You've got an inherent conflict there. So I ran a nonprofit called Communities and Schools of Spokane County. It helped keep kids in our school system, and that goes back to my mom's education background. And my dad ran a nonprofit for 38 years while he was in Spokane, the largest one in Spokane County, that helped people house themselves, did minor home repairs. It was a CAP agency from under the Lyndon Johnson years. So I ran the nonprofit for a while, but I realized we don't fund prevention services in our communities well anymore. And I dealt with the city council of the city of Spokane and the mayor about increasing funding. And I realized after about 2 years, and we'd started an initiative and collected signatures, and behind closed doors, everybody talks about how those are great things and we need to pay for services. But the minute we collected 12,000 signatures and it was on the ballot, all the elected officials in Spokane County suddenly got very, very quiet. So what that meant to me was if things are important to me, I need to run for office and I need to stand up. So in 2011, I ran against a former mayor and a 2-term councilman when I was 38 for council president, which is a citywide seat. That year, I was the only Democrat or progressive, however we want to word it, or populist, that won in Spokane that year in 2011. Everybody else was conservative that won. So I started off on a council that was a majority 4 conservative members and 3 progressives. Today, we're at 6 progressives and 1 conservative on the city council. And the reason, though, that's great, but the reason is because we've been bold. I'm in my 6th year. And when I ran for re-election, I won 63% of the vote against a 5-term state representative. Now, the reason I won was because I wasn't afraid to say what I believed in and what my values were. I ran on a platform of, if we win and we have 5 or more votes, we're going to pass sick leave for every business inside the city of Spokane. And you know, people say that I'm anti-business and I'm a socialist, but you know what sick leave for people polls at? The polling we did in Spokane County, all of the county, 87% believe those are values they believe in. Whoa. Just like the new Cornell study that came out, they interviewed, I think it was over 4,000 people on climate change, and if you dial down to just the 5th district on the data, it's scientifically valid that 69% of people believe climate change is real. Now, we're afraid to use those terms, and sometimes you can use different terms. But 69% of the 5th Congressional District believes that climate change is real. 55% of people in the 5th Congressional District believe that it's man-caused. So why is our congressional representative doesn't even believe? Her answer is the science isn't settled. No, 99.9% of climatologists agree. The science is settled, and we need to have better representation. But how do we combat that? How do we look at issues? And I think that Karen talked about this earlier this morning, and I love it. It's because you start by finding common ground. So when I'm out talking to people and getting them to support me, the first issue I always talk about, and we can all find common ground. From the minute you're born, whether it's through a midwife or in a hospital, you're part of the healthcare system. We all are part of it. We all have somebody that's been in the hospital or had to go to a clinic. It's inevitable, but by the end of your life, you're going to deal with the healthcare system. So why are we allowing insurance companies to make profit off of our health care? I am a proud and strong supporter of Medicare for All. And I want to point out my wife, Ann, came up with me today. And she's lovely to be traveling around with me all over the district for the last couple months. And the reason I'm running is because in 2008, she got diagnosed with breast cancer. Now, when she got diagnosed, you know what the first thing they did was? They told her she couldn't have an MRI. And they told her the hereditary test might not happen. So I had to write an editorial to the Spokesman Review and say, I don't believe that people should be making decisions based on profit on your health care. It shamed the insurance company to cover the MRI. But last fall, there's a new BRCA test, which is the genetic test. BRCA3, I believe it's called. Her doctor said, Ann, you need to have that so you know if your relatives are going to be affected or not. And you know what? We're still appealing that because that insurance company turned down those tests. Nobody should be making a profit off of your health care. And you know what the benefit of a Medicare for All single-payer system is? Every industrialized country has it, and their costs are half of ours. Our businesses and our industry in the United States are not competitive because they are paying for those healthcare costs. If we shift that off the businesses, the manufacturer that's manufacturing goods here and competing against other industrialized countries that have healthcare for all, they automatically become competitive because the price of their goods go down. And they can pay their employees more because 15% of the wage costs. The city of Spokane has 2,100 employees. Our largest cost, other than the direct wages, is the healthcare benefits we offer our employees. If you take that off of our employers, you make America better, you improve our economy, the costs go down for the entire GDP and the percentage of our economy, and you take profit out of each of our healthcare because it's something that affects all of us. We need to be able to find common ground like that on every single issue. When I'm out, our largest export is wheat. Bushels of wheat have gone from $8 to $4 in the 5th Congressional District. And when you sit down and talk to people about why that is, it's because of changing weather patterns. That means that we are having hotter days and colder nights, and we're having rain at intermittent times during the season when it normally wouldn't happen. Our benefit in the bottom portion of the 5th Congressional District is how consistent that is. So why are we trying to defund the USDA? The proposal on the table is to defund the USDA at 30%. That would destroy all the research that we're doing at WSU in order to mitigate those climate change impacts. And then why aren't we talking about rebuilding our middle class? And when we talk about security and when we talk about income inequality, we need to rebuild our middle classes. And there's a really easy way to affect the climate and to affect our economies at the same time. And that's putting a carbon tax on so we can shift from fossil fuels and reinvesting that in renewable resources. And it's a direct way that we can actually solve our problems that we all are seeing across the 5th Congressional District. And there are 2 examples in our congressional district where this is actually working. Columbia and Garfield County, the largest industry that's growing in both of those counties is wind power. Because the same consistency that gives you the wheat is actually great for wind power. But why aren't we reinvesting in batteries that are better for wind power so we can do it in other places where it doesn't have to get directly on the grid? And why aren't we doing that research and necessary in order to rebuild our middle class? Because we all agree, whether you voted for Trump or not, 69% of the 5th Congressional District believes that climate change is real and happening, and we must do something if we want a future. And if we can rebuild our middle class at the same time, is something we all need to be agreeing upon and working upon.